Part 1, Hook, the Murderous Gentleman. Alright, settle in, because what we're about to dive into is one of Oscar Wilde's most deliciously twisted creations, a story that truly skewers the very fabric of Victorian morality with the sharpest, most elegant wit imaginable. We're talking about Lord Arthur Savile's Crime, and trust me, it's an absolute masterclass in dark humor and societal critique. Now, let me ask you a question, and I want you to really think about it. Imagine you're on the cusp of the happiest moment of your life, you're engaged, madly in love, picturing a future filled with domestic bliss. Everything is perfect, idyllic, utterly charming. Then, out of nowhere, you receive an undeniable, almost supernatural, revelation: you are destined to commit a murder. Not just any murder, mind you, but a murder. And what's more, this grim deed must be carried out before you can embark on your new life. So, here's the kicker: would you commit a crime to save your marriage before it even begins? Would you take a life to ensure the purity and success of your future union? Sounds absolutely bonkers, right? Preposterous. Unfathomable. And yet, that, my friends, is the exact, utterly bizarre, and darkly comic predicament facing the protagonist of our story, the impeccably mannered and delightfully dim-wit Lord Arthur Savile. This is where Oscar Wilde, in his inimitable style, introduces us to the glorious absurdity of Lord Arthur's dilemma. Our dear Lord Arthur is, to put it mildly, a man of refined tastes and a highly developed sense of duty, a duty, it turns out, that extends to homicide when faced with an inconvenient prophecy. He's engaged to the lovely Sybil Merton, a woman he adores, and he's looking forward to a life of quiet respectability. But one fateful evening, at a society dinner party, he encounters a cheiromantist, a palm reader, named Mr. Podgers. This isn't just a bit of parlor trick fun for Lord Arthur, he takes it all quite seriously. And Mr. Podgers, with all the solemnity of a seasoned tragedian, delivers the earth-shattering news: Lord Arthur is fated to be a murderer. Now, most people, upon hearing such a pronouncement, would probably laugh it off, dismiss it as charlatanry, or perhaps have a minor existential crisis followed by a strong drink. Not Lord Arthur. Oh no. His reaction is precisely where Wilde's genius truly shines, twisting conventional morality into an exquisite pretzel. Lord Arthur doesn't recoil in horror at the thought of murder as a sin. He doesn't think, good heavens, I must avoid this at all costs. I must fight against destiny. Instead, his mind, in its wonderfully aristocratic and skewed logic, jumps straight to, right, so I have to commit a murder. And I simply cannot allow this regrettable necessity to stain my marriage. It would be utterly improper to bring such a dark cloud into domestic bliss. He essentially decides that it would be terribly uncivilized, and frankly, quite selfish, to marry sweet Sybil with the burden of an unfulfilled murder hanging over his head. It would be like forgetting to polish your shoes before a formal ball, only, you know, with significantly higher stakes. He perceives the act of murder not as a moral failing, but as a premarital chore, a societal duty that must be attended to with the utmost discretion and efficiency, clearing the decks, as it were, for a pure and untainted marital future. Think about that for a second: a crime, the most heinous of acts, reframed entirely through the lens of social obligation. That's the central irony that Wilde so masterfully captures. Murder, for Lord Arthur, becomes a form of social responsibility, almost a purification ritual before he can be truly worthy of his bride. It's an absurd, almost unthinkable proposition, and yet, Wilde makes us believe, through Lord Arthur's perfectly earnest and completely misguided internal monologue, that this is the most logical, most gentlemanly course of action. This is Oscar Wilde's signature wit and dark humor in full, glorious display. He doesn't just tell us Lord Arthur is absurd, he shows us through. Part 2, Introduction. Welcome to the world of Wilde. Here's the script for your YouTube video's introduction, crafted in the style of a natural, conversational audiobook narrator with a personal touch, aimed at setting the scene and welcoming your audience to the world of Wilde. Hello, my fellow connoisseurs of the curious, the captivating, and the delightfully absurd. Welcome back, or welcome for the very first time, to our literary salon here on YouTube. I'm your guide, your conversational companion, and frankly, a bit of a snoop when it comes to the gilded cages of history. Today, we're not just opening a book, we're kicking down the doors to a very specific, very charming, and wonderfully twisted corner of the Victorian imagination. We are stepping into the flamboyant, razor-sharp world of Oscar Wilde, through his deliciously dark short story, Lord Arthur Savile's Crime. Now, when you think Victorian era, what springs to mind? Perhaps stiff upper lips, strict moral codes, opulent ballrooms, and an overwhelming sense of propriety, right? Well, yes, that's certainly one layer. But peel back that starched collar, look past the elaborate curtsies, and you'll find a society absolutely bursting with hidden ironies, fascinating contradictions, and a healthy dose of pure, unadulterated human folly. It was a time of immense social change, rapid industrialization, scientific advancement, and yet, simultaneously, a rigid adherence to tradition and an almost theatrical obsession with outward respectability. The Victorians were masters of the double life, of projecting an image that often bore little resemblance to the messy realities bubbling beneath the surface. They spoke of duty and morality, whilst navigating a labyrinth of unspoken desires and societal pressures, often with a hypocrisy that Wilde so expertly exposed. And no one, absolutely no one, captured that beautiful, bewildering dance between appearance and reality quite like Oscar Wilde. He was more than just a playwright or a novelist, he was a living, breathing paradox, a dandy, an aesthete, an Irish intellectual who charmed and scandalized London society in equal measure. Wilde cultivated his persona with the meticulousness of a gardener tending a prize-winning rose, and every witty epigram, every perfectly tailored waistcoat, was part of his grand performance, designed to provoke thought and laughter. His satire wasn't just a gentle jab, it was a rapier thrust at the very heart of Victorian hypocrisy, piercing through the veneer of respectability to reveal the often comical, sometimes tragic, truths beneath. He didn't just point out the emperor had no clothes, he embroidered them with the most exquisite, glittering threads of paradox and irony, forcing society to confront its own absurdities with a smile, even as it squirmed. He was the ultimate social X-ray, dissecting the polite veneer of high society with the precision of a surgeon and the wit of a stand-up comedian. His genius lay in showing us how utterly ridiculous, and yet utterly human, we all are when we're trying to keep up appearances, or when we attempt to impose a false logic upon the unruly chaos of life. Lord Arthur Savile's crime is a magnificent, glittering jewel of that satirical spirit, a perfect example of Wilde's ability to turn conventional morality on its head, making the logical seem absurd, and the absurd seem terrifyingly logical, all wrapped up in a package of irresistible charm. And that's where I come in. Think of me as your personal, slightly bemused observer, peering over the velvet ropes into this exclusive world, perhaps with a mischievous glint in my eye and a well-worn copy of Wilde in my hand. I've always been fascinated by the polite absurdities of the past, the moments when logic takes a holiday, and good intentions pave the road to, well, you'll see. There's a particular joy, I find, in exploring these older narratives not just as historical artifacts, but as living, breathing commentaries on human nature that remain startlingly relevant to our own times. My favorite kind of history isn't just dates and names. Chapter 1, Lady Windermere's Reception. Alright, welcome back, or if you're new here, welcome to a journey into the delightfully cynical, exquisitely witty, and often profoundly unsettling world of Oscar Wilde. Today, we're diving into one of his lesser-known, yet utterly compelling, short stories, Lord Arthur Savile's Crime, a study of duty. And like any good narrative, it begins with a bang, or rather, with the shimmering, decadent, and slightly absurd backdrop of Victorian high society. Imagine, if you will, the scene. We open our story not in a quiet study, nor a brooding alleyway, but right in the heart of London's notorious social season, at one of the most talked about events of the year, Lady Windermere's reception. Now, if you've ever read Wilde before, you know his plays and stories are almost always set amongst the crème de la crème, the aristocrats, the socialites, the people for whom life is often a grand performance, an elaborate dance of manners, gossip, and the endless pursuit of novelty. He was, after all, a master at dissecting the very society he captivated. And Lady Windermere's house, I picture it, is ablaze with light. Every gas lamp, every towering crystal chandelier, not only casting a brilliant, almost blinding glow, but reflecting off polished surfaces, ornate gilded frames, and the endless sparkle of jewelry. The very air would be thick, I imagine, with a heady mix, the sweet, almost oppressive scent of hothouse flowers, exotic lilies, oversized roses, orchids imported at immense cost, mingling with the heavier, sometimes even musky, perfumes of the ladies, and the faint, almost metallic tang of expensive champagne bubbling in countless fragile flutes. It's a calculated sensory overload, designed to impress and to denote status. The soundscape itself would be a complex symphony of societal interaction, the incessant rustle of voluminous silk and satin gowns, their trains sweeping across intricate Persian carpets, the delicate, almost musical clink of glasses, the ceaseless murmur of polite conversation, a veritable cascade of trivialities and veiled criticisms, punctuated by bursts of laughter, perhaps a little too loud, a little too performative, echoing against the high ceilings. You can almost feel the press of bodies in the reception rooms, can't you? A veritable sea of faces, some genuinely beautiful, others merely adorned with the latest Parisian fashions and an unwavering air of inherited confidence. The women, in their impossibly corseted gowns, their décolletage perhaps a little too daring for some, adorned with diamonds, pearls, and emeralds that would rival a small kingdom's treasury, are a spectacle in themselves, each a living, breathing advertisement for her family's wealth and social standing. The men, in their immaculate evening wear, discussing politics with feigned interest, or perhaps more likely, the latest tantalizing scandal or horse race results, all delivered with a studied nonchalance that belies the fervent gossip beneath. It's a world where appearance isn't just paramount, it's everything, where status is the ultimate currency, and where boredom, above all else, is the greatest, most unforgivable sin. Wilde, ever the keenest observer and the most incisive critic, paints this picture not just as a static setting, but as an active, almost oppressive character in itself, a glittering, suffocating cage for its inhabitants. This lavish party, however, isn't just about showing off wealth or gossiping. It's also, crucially, about entertainment, a desperate quest to fill the endless hours of leisure that come with inherited fortune. And here, Wilde introduces the improbable catalyst for our entire story, a figure who stands in stark, almost comedic contrast to the shimmering backdrop, Mr. Septimus R. Podgers. Now, Mr. Podgers isn't your typical guest. He's certainly not a duke, a marquis, or even a particularly eligible bachelor. He's, in Wilde's own rather dry words, a cheiromantist. And if that word sends you scrambling for a dictionary, don't worry, it simply means a palm reader. Yes, a palm reader. In Chapter 2, The Fatal Prophecy. Welcome back, fellow travelers through the literary landscapes. In our last chapter, we set the stage. We met the charming, somewhat conventional Lord Arthur Savile, a man sailing smoothly through the tranquil waters of Victorian high society. He was blissfully unaware of the storm brewing on the horizon, ready to embark on what he believed would be a perfectly pleasant evening at Lady Windermere's, a night crowned by the promise of his beloved Sybil Merton. He was, in short, a man utterly content, a picture of propriety and quiet happiness, his future laid out before him like a meticulously curated garden path. And then, he made a seemingly innocuous decision, to have his palm read. Ah, the palm reading. In that era, it was often little more than a parlor trick, a bit of frivolous entertainment for the upper crust, wasn't it? A diverting curiosity, something to chuckle about over champagne and cucumber sandwiches. Perhaps a way to spark a little gossip or a fleeting romance. But sometimes, these casual diversions can peel back the curtain on something far more elemental. And for Lord Arthur, this wasn't just a diversion, it was the moment the very ground beneath his feet shifted, irrevocably, not just changing his plans, but his very perception of himself and his place in the world. So, let's step back into that elegant drawing room. The air is thick with the murmur of polite conversation, the gentle clinking of teacups and the rustle of silk. There's the subtle, expensive scent of lilies and polished wood, utterly devoid of any hint of the chilling truth about to be unearthed. Lord Arthur, with his characteristic blend of aristocratic politeness and a touch of shy curiosity, perhaps a nervous flutter in his stomach, offers his hand to Mr. Septimus Podgers. Now, Mr. Podgers isn't your theatrical, wild-eyed mystic. He's described by Wilde with a delightful touch of irony, a rather ordinary man, almost prosaic, certainly not someone you'd expect to hold the keys to destiny. He's precise, almost clinical in his approach. He took Lord Arthur's rather long, slender hand, a hand accustomed to perhaps holding a teacup with an elegant lift of the little finger, or guiding the reins of a carriage, or soon, placing a delicate engagement ring on Sybil's finger. He turned it over, his own fingers, which Wilde describes as being small, fat, and flabby, tracing the intricate, almost invisible lines on Arthur's palm with an unsettling, almost scientific intensity. It wasn't the touch of a fortune-teller seeking to charm, but of an analyst dissecting a map. Think about that moment. The quiet tension that descends, almost imperceptibly, upon that small tableau in the corner of the vibrant room. The subtle shift in the room's atmosphere as the focus narrows to these two men, one, still in good humor, seeking mere amusement, the other, about to deliver a verdict that would echo through eternity for his subject. Lord Arthur, I imagine, felt a slight tingle, perhaps the cool touch of Mr. Podgers's skin against his, or perhaps the faint, almost imperceptible hum of premonition in the air. He probably expected something trivial, something flattering: you'll have a long life, much happiness, many children. The usual pleasantries, designed to please and amuse. He certainly wasn't bracing himself for a seismic shock to his entire worldview, a disruption that would redefine his very identity. Mr. Podgers was silent for a long time. An unnervingly long time, perhaps, for mere pleasantries. His brow furrowed, deepening the lines on his otherwise plain face. His eyes, often described as peculiarly bright and restless, seemed to bore into the very essence of Lord Arthur's fate, etched in those delicate lines of his palm. He moved his thumb slowly, deliberately, along the line of life, then carefully traced the line of heart, his concentration absolute, almost painful to witness. The other guests, still chatting, still laughing, were merely a distant, muffled hum. For Lord Arthur, and for us, the audience peering over Mr. Podgers' shoulder. Chapter 3, Duty over Morality. Welcome back, dear listeners. We've journeyed through the unsettling revelation of the prophecy, seen Lord Arthur Savile's world tilt on its axis, and witnessed his initial, almost comically dramatic, despair. But now, as we step into Chapter 3, titled Duty over Morality, the story takes an even more peculiar, and frankly, disturbing turn. This is where Arthur's internal landscape truly reveals itself, a labyrinth of twisted logic and self-deception, all centered around his engagement to the charming, utterly oblivious Sybil Merton. Arthur Savile, as we know, isn't a villain in the traditional sense. He's not driven by malice or greed, nor by any deep-seated desire for power or destruction. Far from it. He's a product of his time, a quintessential Victorian gentleman, a man of refined tastes, impeccable manners, an almost obsessive concern for social decorum, and, crucially, a rather underdeveloped capacity for genuine, independent moral reasoning. He's well-meaning, perhaps even sweet in his own way, a gentle soul who enjoys the aesthetic pleasures of life and the comforts of his aristocratic position. But crucially, he's conventional to his very core. The world, for Arthur, is supposed to be orderly, predictable, and above all, proper. The palm reader's pronouncement, that he is destined to commit a murder, shatters this neat little world into 1,000 shards, forcing him to confront something utterly improper. And his immediate instinct isn't to question the validity of the prophecy itself, which he accepts with a baffling credulity, but to figure out how to manage this inconvenient truth. It's not a question of if but how to proceed given this foretold inevitability. This brings us to the core of this chapter, Arthur's utterly bizarre and, to us, horrifying interpretation of duty. Think about it. When you hear that word, duty, you probably picture something noble, perhaps a soldier serving their country, a doctor tending to the sick, a parent protecting their child, or even just fulfilling a civic responsibility. Lord Arthur, however, contorts this concept into something almost unrecognizable, a grotesque parody of true moral obligation. His duty, as he defines it, becomes the almost ritualistic obligation to fulfill his murderous destiny in a manner that causes the least amount of social disruption, preserves his reputation, and, most ironically, ostensibly protects his beloved Sybil. He rationalizes that the crime must happen, so his duty is to see it through, not to prevent it. Let's delve into that internal monologue, shall we? Imagine Arthur, alone in his opulent drawing room, perhaps pacing before a roaring fire, the polished surfaces of his antique furniture reflecting the flickering flames, a tumbler of brandy untouched on the mahogany table. His mind isn't grappling with the horror of taking a human life. No, that's too raw, too morally challenging for his delicate, sheltered sensibilities. He neatly sidesteps that ethical chasm. Instead, he's thinking, a crime. My crime. It's inevitable. It hangs over me like a metaphysical guillotine. But I am a gentleman. And a gentleman, above all else, must be responsible and considerate of those around him. His internal narrative, I imagine, is a masterpiece of self-deception, a verbal dance around the unspeakable. It goes something like this: I cannot, in good conscience, marry my sweet Sybil with the sword of Damocles dangling over our marital bliss. It wouldn't be fair to her. It wouldn't be honorable to tie her to a man who has such a terrible, unavoidable event looming over his head. Imagine the scandal. Imagine the horror for her, discovering that her husband, after the fact, was a destined murderer, living under the shadow of a future crime. The guilt, the taint. No, that simply won't do. I must act. I must clear the path for her happiness. I must fulfill this prophesied act before Wednesday. Do you hear the colossal, almost mind-boggling leap in logic here? The moral gymnastics required to arrive at such a conclusion? He's not contemplating avoid. A gentleman cannot go to the altar with such a burden hanging over his head, nor should he subject his innocent bride to such a future revelation. He tells himself this, I imagine, with a heavy sigh and a furrowed brow, believing himself to be the epitome of noble selflessness, a man sacrificing his immediate desires for the greater good of his beloved. So, the wedding is postponed. Not cancelled, mind you, because that would be an even greater scandal, implying some fundamental flaw in Sybil or the engagement itself. Just delayed. Until the deed is done. He needs time. Time to find the right victim, time to plan the execution, time to mentally prepare for this unfortunate necessity. This decision, so calmly made, so logically structured within his warped worldview, underscores the terrifying extent of his detachment from the true gravity of murder. It's not an ethical problem, it's a logistical one. It's a box on a checklist, a prerequisite for marital bliss. He genuinely believes that if the murder is committed before the wedding, it somehow purifies the marriage. It becomes a closed chapter, a regrettable historical event rather than an impending doom. He can then present himself to Sybil, and to society, as a man whose duty has been discharged, a man free of the premarital blemish of a future crime. And here, my friends, is the profound, heartbreaking, and utterly grotesque irony of it all. Lord Arthur Savile, the gentleman who wouldn't dream of spilling tea on a Persian rug, is committing murder, the ultimate act of malice and destruction, the profoundest violation of human sanctity, precisely to protect his wife's future happiness. He envisions Sybil, blissfully unaware, living a serene life with him, all because he preemptively became a killer. He believes he is acting out of love, out of a profound sense of responsibility towards her. He's sacrificing his own peace of mind, or what's left of it, and his very soul to spare her the ignominy of being married to a man who will commit a crime. He's not simply avoiding a future crime, he's actively creating a present one, all under the misguided banner of marital duty. But the truth, of course, is that he's condemning himself to a life built on a lie, and condemning anyone he murders to an utterly unjust fate. He's actively embracing the very thing he fears, transforming from a man destined to commit a crime into a man who chooses to commit one. His idea of protecting Sybil's happiness is so superficial, so focused on external appearances, social standing, and the avoidance of scandal, that it utterly misses the point of genuine love, partnership, and ethical conduct. True happiness wouldn't be built on a foundation of murder, no matter how well-intentioned or preemptive the act might be in his eyes. He's treating morality like a contractual obligation, something to be fulfilled and then set aside, rather than an inherent guiding principle. This warped sense of duty, this grotesque irony, is Oscar Wilde at his absolute satirical best. He's holding up a polished, yet distorting, mirror to the Victorian upper class, exposing the absurd lengths to which they would go to maintain appearances, to rationalize away inconvenient truths, and to prioritize rigid societal conventions, their idea of honor and propriety, over genuine moral integrity. Arthur isn't evil in the way a hardened criminal is evil, he's a tragicomic figure, a man so utterly conventional, so steeped in the superficialities of his world, that when confronted with the profoundly unconventional and supernatural, he applies his conventional, almost bureaucratic, problem-solving skills to the most unconventional and morally repugnant problem imaginable: how to efficiently schedule and execute a murder to preserve his social standing and marital bliss. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? How often do we, in our own lives, rationalize things? Perhaps not to the extent of planning a murder, thankfully, that's a rather extreme example. But how do we sometimes twist our own logic, even subconsciously? Chapter 4, The First Candidate, Lady Clementina. Welcome back, fellow travelers in the labyrinthine corridors of Victorian folly. We've journeyed with Lord Arthur Savile through the chilling prophecy that has upended his otherwise perfectly structured, perfectly proper English existence. Last time, we left him teetering on the precipice of an unimaginable choice, either renounce love and happiness, or embrace a most peculiar form of destiny. He had to commit a murder. Not out of malice, you understand, but out of a perverse sense of duty, a moral imperative dictated by the lines on his hand. A truly Wildean dilemma, wouldn't you say? And so, we arrive at chapter 4, the first candidate, Lady Clementina. This is where Arthur, dear, sweet, well-meaning Arthur, stops contemplating the abstract horror and begins the terrifying descent into the practicalities of becoming an unwilling instrument of fate. Our goal today is to witness this transition, the selection of his first victim, the acquisition of the deadly tools, and the chilling, mundane scene of the deed's prelude. The weight of the world, or at least the weight of his engagement to the lovely Sybil Merton, pressed down on him. Arthur, as we know, was not a man given to radical thought or spontaneous action. He was a creature of habit, of social expectation. So, how does such a man, faced with such a horrifying prophecy, proceed? He approaches it with the methodical, almost bureaucratic efficiency of someone planning a garden party, a very, very final garden party. He needed a victim. But not just any victim. This wasn't about malice, it was about necessity. Arthur wasn't some back alley ruffian. His intended act, in his mind, had to be, dare I say, elegant. It had to be clean, discreet, and above all, it had to make a minimal ripple in the social pond. He wasn't looking to commit a crime of passion, but a crime of convenience. And then, like a perfectly placed piece in a deadly jigsaw puzzle, his second cousin, Lady Clementina Beauchamp, floated into his consciousness. Now, Lady Clementina was, shall we say, a character of a certain vintage. She was old, certainly. But more importantly, she was perpetually unwell. Not in a dramatic, attention-seeking way, but in a quietly, persistently ailing fashion. She had a litany of minor complaints, palpitations, neuralgia, headaches, a touch of rheumatism, a persistent cough. Her life, by her own constant recounting, was a symphony of minor ailments. She found a strange comfort in her infirmities, a defining characteristic that made her both pitiable and, in Arthur's twisted logic, incredibly useful. Wilde, with his rapier wit, paints her perfectly. She was a woman who had been a beauty in her day, but now she was a perfect wreck. He describes her as one of those charming old ladies, who never allow one to forget that they have been charming. She was a widow, childless, with no one particularly dependent on her, and frankly, not many people who would mourn her loss with any real depth of feeling beyond polite societal expectation. Arthur's rationalization here is chillingly pragmatic. He wasn't taking a vibrant life, a blossoming future. He was merely accelerating the inevitable for someone already in decline. He wasn't ending life, he was merely assisting it in its natural course. It's a truly awful piece of self-deception, isn't it? He saw it as doing the least harm. Who better to remove from the world than someone who, by her own constant admission, found the world rather tiresome and was already half out the door. It's a darkly humorous, almost utilitarian approach to murder that only Wilde could conceive. The irony, of course, is that she liked being unwell. It gave her purpose, a topic of conversation. Arthur was about to rob her of that, too. So, the victim was chosen. Now, for the method. Arthur needed something untraceable, something that would mimic a natural death. He wasn't going to use a knife or a pistol. No, Lord Arthur Savile required something more subtle. His thoughts turned to poisons. And through a rather circuitous, and frankly, hilarious. Chapter 5, Anxiety in Venice. Alright, welcome back, my fellow literary adventurers. If you're just joining us, we've been deep diving into Oscar Wilde's deliciously dark, yet surprisingly light-hearted, tale of Lord Arthur Savile's crime. We left Arthur at a crossroads, didn't we? A man burdened by a prophecy, convinced he must commit a murder before his wedding, all for the sake of his future wife's happiness. Yes, you heard that right. It's peak Wilde. And now, we arrive at chapter 5, which I've titled Anxiety in Venice. Because, truly, what could be more fitting for a man trying to outrun his own destiny, or at least, prepare for it, than the labyrinthine beauty and melancholic charm of Venice? This chapter, for me, is all about that excruciating, soul-sucking experience of the waiting period, the tension of the unknown, when you know something monumental is coming, but you have no idea when or how. So, Arthur, bless his peculiar heart, decides the best course of action is not to confront the prophecy, not to seek help, but to strategically remove himself from London. Why? Well, a few reasons. First, plausible deniability, of course. Can't be seen gallivanting about while someone you're supposedly trying to off meets their maker. Second, and perhaps more psychologically revealing, it's an attempt to escape the immediate pressure, to create a physical distance between his duty and his daily life. London, with its gossiping drawing rooms and constant social obligations, is hardly the place for a man contemplating a prenuptial murder. He needs space. He needs to breathe, or at least, prepare to hold his breath. He sets off for Italy. Imagine the journey. Not a pleasure trip, certainly. Each mile south, each passing landscape of rolling hills and ancient vineyards, must have felt like a step further into an inescapable dream. He's traveling, but he's not seeing. His mind is a swirling vortex, consumed by Lady Clementina, by the poison he's yet to administer, by the ticking clock of his engagement. He's not the wide-eyed tourist, he's a man on a mission, albeit one that fills him with existential dread. There's a profound contrast here, isn't there? The vibrant, sun-drenched beauty of Italy, the very picture of La Dolce Vita, serving as a mere backdrop to his utterly grim internal landscape. It's like watching a dark film play out in a brightly lit theater. And where does he land? Venice. Ah, Venice. The city of masks, of hidden canals, of shadows, and light playing on ancient stone. Is there a more perfect backdrop for Arthur's internal drama? Venice, with its sense of being suspended between worlds, its quiet decay, its unique beauty that often feels tinged with melancholy. It's a city that allows one to disappear, to blend into the shadows, to perhaps even find a kind of morbid peace amidst its timelessness. But for Arthur, it's not peace he finds, but merely a change of scenery for his torment. A new stage for his personal purgatory. He takes up residence, You can picture it, a quiet palazzo overlooking a murky canal. The gondolas glide past, the calls of the gondoliers echo, the smell of salt and old stone hangs in the air. Outwardly, it's paradise. Inwardly, a storm. This stark contrast between the external beauty and his internal turmoil is vintage Wilde. He often uses sumptuous settings to highlight the dark undercurrents of human nature and society. Arthur walks the narrow Calais, crosses ancient bridges, gazes at Byzantine mosaics, but his soul is miles away, still stuck in a London drawing room, waiting for a fate to unfold. Now, let's talk about the real meat of this chapter, the psychological burden of unfinished business. This isn't just about Arthur, it's a universal human experience, amplified to a grotesque degree. What happens when you know something has to happen, something monumental, terrifying, or simply unresolved, but you're powerless to control its timing? Think about it. We've all had those moments, haven't we? Waiting for exam results, for a job interview call, for news from a doctor, or for a difficult conversatio. Chapter 6, The Unfortunate Discovery. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. I'm your host, and we're diving back into the delightfully dark and subtly satirical world of Oscar Wilde's Lord Arthur Savile's Crime. Last time, we left our rather unconventional protagonist, Lord Arthur, with a burden he believed he had finally lifted. Lady Clementina Beauchamp, the sweet, elderly lady with a penchant for harmless gossip and a heart condition, had passed away peacefully in Venice. Arthur, you'll recall, had, with his twisted sense of duty, provided her with a gift he believed would fulfill his supposed destiny, a slow-acting poison. He thought he was a murderer. He thought his moral obligation was now complete, clearing the path for his marriage to the lovely Sybil Merton. But as with all good stories, and especially those by Wilde, things are rarely as straightforward as they seem. This, my friends, brings us to Chapter 6, The Unfortunate Discovery. Picture this: Arthur, having received the news of Lady Clementina's demise, makes his way back to London. There's a certain gravity to his return. Not the visible grief of a mourning relative, no. Arthur's emotions are far more complex, far more internal. He carries with him the weight of a secret, the quiet satisfaction of a difficult task completed, a grim sense of having fulfilled a cosmic demand. He's probably thinking, finally. It's over. I did it. I'm free. There's a dark relief, a sense of grim duty discharged. The cloud, he imagines, has lifted. He arrives back in the city, the bustling heart of England, a stark contrast to the quiet canals of Venice where Lady Clementina had drawn her last breath. And then comes the inevitable, mundane task that often follows death, the sorting of effects. Lady Clementina, being a woman of a certain age and a particular station, had accumulated a great many things. And who better, in Arthur's mind, to handle the disposition of her personal belongings than her intended heir, her dear friend? It was a duty, yes, but also, perhaps, a subconscious desire to confirm the finality of it all. To close the chapter, quite literally. The scene would have been poignant for anyone else. A grand old house, now quiet, echoes of a life lived, memories clinging to every object. The subtle scent of lavender and old paper, the quiet rustle of fabric as he went through wardrobes, the glint of trinkets in dusty boxes. He's going through her things, item by item, with a sort of detached meticulousness. Perhaps a pang of something akin to sadness, or maybe just the vague discomfort of rummaging through someone's intimate possessions. He's picking up porcelain figurines, sorting through letters, deciding what to keep, what to give away, what to discard. Every object a silent witness to a life now ended. And then it happened. He's sifting through a small, rather ornate Italian cabinet, the kind of antique that holds secrets and small treasures. It's a beautifully crafted piece, perhaps a souvenir from one of her many European travels. Inside, nestled amongst delicate lace handkerchiefs and some rather quaint devotional trinkets, he finds it. A small, rather peculiar little box. It's exquisitely carved, an artisanal piece, a miniature work of art in itself. And as he opens it, probably expecting to find an old locket, a forgotten ring, or some other sentimental trifle, there it is. The poison. Untouched. Still sitting there. The same small, silver sugar-coated pill that he had given her, the one that was supposed to bring about her demise, the one he had believed had successfully, if belatedly, done its job. It was exactly where he had left it, within her reach, but clearly, never taken. Imagine that moment. The blood draining from his face. The slow, creeping realization. The world, which he had just carefully reassembled, shatters into a million pieces around him. The relief he had felt, the sense of moral debt paid, the belief that he was finally free to marry Sybil without the stain of a predestined murder hanging over him, all of it evaporating in an instant. It's a truly goo. Chapter 7, The Explosive Alternative. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. I'm so glad you're here joining me for another deep dive into Oscar Wilde's delightfully dark and deeply ironic tale, Lord Arthur Savile's Crime. We're moving along, and let me tell you, things are about to get explosive. Literally. We're in Chapter 7, The Explosive Alternative. If you've been with us, you'll remember the absolute fiasco that was Arthur's first attempt at murder. The poisoned pill, meant for poor Lady Clementina, ended up, miraculously, perhaps, being taken by her, only to cure her chronic indigestion. Can you imagine the sheer, soul-crushing humiliation for Arthur? He'd painstakingly planned this, convinced himself of the moral necessity, and the universe just shrugged. It's like when you spend hours building IKEA furniture, only for the last screw to not fit, and the whole thing wobbles precariously. Except, with murder. And a lot more existential dread. So, here we are. Arthur, bless his twisted heart, is not deterred. He's a man on a mission he believes is ordained by fate and necessary for the happiness of his beloved Sybil. He's failed once, but he's learned. He needs a more reliable method. Something less prone to the vagaries of digestive systems and accidental good health. He needs a guarantee. And honestly, who among us hasn't, at some point, had a plan go so spectacularly wrong that you just want to throw your hands up and resort to the most extreme alternative available? Arthur, in his own unique way, is channeling that frustration. And that brings us to his next target, the Dean of Chichester. Now, who is the Dean? He's actually Lady Clementina's brother. And honestly, Lord Arthur doesn't particularly care for him. Wilde, in his subtle genius, doesn't even bother to give the Dean a name beyond his title. He's simply the Dean. This choice is brilliant because it highlights Arthur's dehumanization of his victims. They aren't people, they're obstacles to be removed, stepping stones on his path to domestic bliss. It's a pragmatic evil, devoid of real malice, which somehow makes it even more chillingly absurd. Arthur isn't a villain in the traditional sense, he's more like a terribly misguided, slightly homicidal administrator. He's probably thinking, right, tick off remove obstacle from the to-do list. Arthur, as always, approaches this with a sort of grim, almost bureaucratic efficiency. He's not reveling in evil, he's executing a necessary task. He's probably thinking, right, method 1 failed. On to method 2. Must consult the relevant experts. He likely scours his memory, perhaps flipping through a mental Rolodex of eccentric acquaintances, trying to recall anyone who might possess the specific, shall we say, skill set required for a more definitive solution. But who does one consult when one needs a bomb? You can't exactly Google bomb-making instructions for upper-class dilettantes in Victorian London. No, Arthur, with his remarkably specific network, recalls a conversation at a rather dull dinner party, and aren't they all, sometimes? He remembers meeting a certain Professor Winkelkopf. Professor Winkelkopf, a German gentleman, had been rather verbose on the subject of anarchism, the necessity of societal breakdown, and, rather helpfully for Arthur, the practical application of explosive devices for achieving these lofty goals. It's almost comical, isn't it? Arthur, seeking to maintain the social order of his own life, turning to someone whose entire philosophy is about destroying all social order. The irony, as always with Wilde, is delicious. So, Arthur sets out to find him. Imagine this scene: Lord Arthur Savile, impeccably dressed, probably still carrying the faint scent of lilies from his last failed attempt, venturing into a part of London he usually only passes through in a hansom cab, a part of the city where the gaslights seem a little dimmer, the shadows a little longer. He finds Professor Winkelkopf's lodging. Picture it, a dingy, probably smoke-filled room, cluttered with strand. Chapter 8, A Whimsical Failure. Alright, my friends, welcome back to the channel. We're diving deeper into the delicious, darkly comedic world of Oscar Wilde's Lord Arthur Savile's Crime. And if you've been following along, you know our dear Lord Arthur is a man on a mission, a gentleman of duty, though his duty is, well, it's murder. A preemptive, morally confusing, yet oddly principled murder. We just witnessed the glorious, almost poetic failure of his first attempt, that rather unfortunate incident with the poisoned wedding ring and the unsuspecting cannon. A flop, a bust, a complete and utter misfire. Lord Arthur, bless his determined heart, found himself staring down the barrel of a future with his beloved Sybil, yet still burdened by the cheiromantist's prophecy, he must commit a crime before marriage. And, as we've established, Arthur's a stickler for what he believes to be destiny. So, Here we are, in Chapter 8, a whimsical failure. You see, for Arthur, that initial setback wasn't a sign to give up, it was merely a learning experience. He reasoned, quite logically for a man in his unique predicament, that his first plot lacked oomph. It was too subtle, too dependent on the victim actually using the ring. He needed something more direct, more forceful, more explosive. Literally. And so, Arthur, ever the resourceful future killer, turned his attention to his next intended victim, Lady Clementina Beauchamp. Now, Lady Clementina is an absolute gem of a character, quintessential Wilde, really. She's described as a sweet, rather eccentric old woman with a penchant for collecting clocks, hundreds of them, apparently, all chiming at different times, creating a delightful cacophony of temporal chaos in her home. Imagine living in that house. You'd never know what time it truly was, which, ironically, makes her the perfect target for something designed to mark a very specific, final moment. Arthur's plan was meticulously crafted this time. He commissioned a clockmaker to create a truly special piece, a small, ornate timepiece, designed to look utterly harmless, even charming. But within its delicate mechanisms, a deadly secret was hidden. It wasn't just any clock, it was a bomb, timed to explode a few days after its delivery. A ticking time bomb, delivered as a token of affection. The irony is just chef's kiss. He sends it to Lady Clementina as a thoughtful gift. Can you imagine the scene? The delivery boy, innocent as can be, handing over a meticulously wrapped package, a symbol of friendship, which is, in reality, a miniature harbinger of doom. And Arthur, our tortured protagonist, is left to wait. This waiting period, for me, is where the story truly twists the knife. Arthur isn't a psychopath, he's not relishing the impending explosion with glee. He's suffering. He's in a state of agonizing anticipation, convinced that this time, it must work. This isn't just about killing Lady Clementina, it's about fulfilling his destiny so he can finally be free to marry Sybil. It's about getting this dreadful duty over with. Every tick of every clock in his own home, every moment that passes, is a torment. He's envisioning the blast, the news reports, the finality of it all. He probably mentally rehearses his innocent reaction, his mournful condolences. He believes he's on the cusp of freedom, of peace. He checks the papers daily, eyes scanning for any mention of an unfortunate accident at Lady Clementina's residence. His heart must have been a drum solo, thumping against his ribs with a mixture of dread and desperate hope. The weight of his secret, the monstrous deed he believes he must commit, is crushing him. He's a man teetering on the edge, propelled by a bizarre blend of superstition and a twisted sense of obligation. And then, the day comes. Not the day of the explosion, mind you. The day of the news. Arthur receives a letter from Lady Clementina. His heart must have sunk, because a letter means she's alive. But what does it say? She writes, effusively, about his charming little present. She thanks him, raves about its exquisite craftsmanship. Chapter 9, The Night Walk. All right, welcome back, my fellow literary adventurers, to another deep dive into the fascinating, darkly comedic world of Oscar Wilde's Lord Arthur Savile's crime. We've been on quite a journey with Arthur, haven't we? From the initial, almost farcical, revelation of a destined murder to his increasingly desperate and, let's be honest, spectacularly unsuccessful attempts to fulfill that grim prophecy. Each chapter has peeled back another layer of his polite Victorian veneer, revealing the frantic, morally compromised man underneath. As we open chapter 9, aptly titled The Night Walk, we find Arthur at his absolute nadir. The previous chapters saw him trying to orchestrate death with a poisoned clock, a failure. Then, a bomb disguised as a wedding present, another failure. His well of murderous options is not just drying up, it feels like it's been actively sabotaged by some cosmic prankster. With each botched attempt, the crushing weight of his supposed destiny, and the looming deadline of his wedding, presses down harder. He's not merely frustrated, he's utterly, profoundly despairing. It's a despair that eats at his soul, dissolving his sense of purpose, his honor, and even his sanity. Imagine Arthur, now. The London night has swallowed the last vestiges of daylight, leaving behind a stage lit by the flickering, melancholic glow of gas lamps. They cast long, wavering shadows across the wet cobblestones, slicked with a perpetual dampness that seems to seep into everything. A chill, heavy air hangs, typical of an English night, carrying the faint, earthy scent of coal smoke mingled with the brackish tang of the river. He walks, not with the confident stride of a lord, but with the aimless, heavy-footed gait of someone whose mind is a chaotic tempest. His top hat is pulled low, almost obscuring his eyes, and his expensive overcoat is clutched tight, not just against the biting cold, but against the intrusive, tormenting thoughts that gnaw at him from within. He finds himself drawn, as so many lost souls in a vast, indifferent city often are, to the Thames embankment. The river, a dark, churning ribbon reflecting the distant, fragmented lights, seems to murmur secrets he can almost understand, ancient whispers of human struggle and inevitable flow. The grand buildings that line its banks, the Houses of Parliament, the imposing hospitals, the stately government offices, stand like silent, indifferent giants, their silhouettes stark against the bruised purple sky. Here, amidst this grandeur and overwhelming gloom, Arthur feels utterly insignificant, a tiny, powerless cog in a terrifying, preordained machine. Each step he takes isn't a choice, it's a stumble deeper into the abyss, an abyss he believes has been carved out specifically for him by the hand of an unyielding fate. He's been out all night, just walking, thinking, or perhaps, trying desperately not to think, trying to outrun the relentless clock that ticks towards his wedding day. And this, my friends, brings us to the very heart of Oscar Wilde's subtle, yet profound, commentary in this story, the eternal, perplexing dance between fate and free will. Arthur, as we've witnessed, has fully, perhaps even foolishly, embraced the idea of fate. He genuinely believes that he must commit a murder, not because he wants to, not because it aligns with his moral compass, quite the opposite, but because a cheiromantist, a palm reader, told him so. He's not questioning if the prophecy is true, he's merely trying to fulfill it. In doing so, he has, with the tragic irony that Wilde savors, become a slave to it. He's become an instrument of a destiny he himself empowers. But let's pause and consider this, really consider it, for a moment. Are we truly just puppets on strings, destined to play out a predetermined script, regardless of our desires or intentions? Or do we, at every turn, at every crossroads, possess the power to choose, to deviate, to carve our own path, to defy the predictions, no matter how convincing they may seem? Arthur's entire premise, his entire torment. Chapter 10, Fulfilling Destiny. Welcome back, dear listeners, to our journey through the peculiar moral landscape of Oscar Wilde's Lord Arthur Savile's crime. We've been tracing Arthur's increasingly desperate, and frankly, absurd quest to commit a murder. He's tried bombs, he's tried poison, he's tried every method conceivable to dispatch someone, anyone, just to get this ghastly business over with. His wedding to Sybil Merton, his beautiful, unsuspecting Sybil, looms large, a constant, nagging reminder of the dark prophecy hanging over his head, a prophecy that has cast a shadow of almost unbearable anxiety over every waking moment. He's not a villain, our Arthur. No, not in the traditional sense. He's a gentleman, obsessed with duty, even if that duty is, ironically, to commit a heinous act. He believes, with every fiber of his being, that he cannot marry Sybil, that he cannot embark on a life of blissful matrimony, until this destiny is fulfilled. It's a twisted kind of honor, isn't it? A moral compass spun entirely off its axis by a single, chilling prediction that he, in his earnest but utterly misguided way, takes as gospel. He's been living in a purgatory of his own making, a self-imposed prison of preordained villainy. He's paced the elegant streets of London, haunted and haggard, his usually impeccable demeanor marred by a profound, consuming weariness. He's almost been begging fate to present him with an opportunity, a clear sign, a definitive moment. He's been looking for a victim, a vessel for this grim necessity, but not just any victim. No, it has to be someone who, in his twisted logic, deserves it, or at least, someone whose demise wouldn't cause too much personal unpleasantness for him. He's a snob, after all, even in his murderous intentions. The sheer impracticality of finding such a person has driven him to the brink of despair. The irony is, of course, that the universe, in its infinite, mischievous wisdom, often provides exactly what we need, but in the most unexpected and often, darkly humorous ways. Sometimes, it feels like the universe itself is an Oscar Wilde play, full of witty but cruel twists. And so, we arrive at chapter 10, the moment we've all been, perhaps morbidly, anticipating. The moment when destiny, as Arthur perceives it, finally comes knocking. Or perhaps, more accurately, when Arthur finally gives destiny a mighty, decisive shove. This is it. The actual commission of the crime. Arthur, by this point, is a man on the brink of utter collapse. Imagine the crushing mental toll. The constant planning, the agonizing over details, the abject failures of his previous, clumsy attempts, the bomb that didn't explode, the poison that remained in its vial. The gnawing anxiety that he's failing at murder, of all things. It's almost comical, if it weren't so utterly tragic for him. He walks along the embankment, the Thames flowing dark and indifferent beside him, a vast, murky ribbon of water that mirrors, perhaps, his own dark current of thought and the chaotic depths of his conscience. The notorious London fog, that classic Wildean atmospheric touch, hangs heavy, a thick, damp shroud muffling the sounds of the bustling city, isolating him utterly in his own macabre reflections. The chill of the evening air seems to mirror the cold, almost desperate resolve forming in his heart, a resolve born not of malice, but of a perverse, consuming sense of obligation, a twisted duty to the universe itself. He's gazing into the river, perhaps contemplating his own end, or perhaps just lost in the rhythmic, hypnotic flow, trying to drown out the noise in his head, when his eyes snag on a figure. A familiar figure. One that sends a jolt through him, a sudden, almost electric recognition that banishes the fog from his mind, if not from the air. It's a moment that feels less like coincidence and more like an inescapable, pre-written plot twist of the most darkly comedic variety. Because there, shuffling along with a slightly stooped gait, completely oblivious to the momentous, indeed fatal, role he's about to play in a very bizarre. There's no grand scheme here anymore, no elaborate plotting. Just the sight of the man who started it all, presenting himself, almost like a sacrificial lamb, at the precise moment Arthur is most desperate, most ready to act. Wilde's genius here is in the suddenness, the almost casual, chilling brutality of it all. There's no dramatic monologue, no villainous gloating. There's only the act. A brief, decisive, unhesitating movement. Arthur steps forward. Mr. Podgers, perhaps lost in his own esoteric thoughts of palms and destinies, of future fortunes and past misfortunes, doesn't even register the approaching, silently determined figure until it's far, far too late. There's a brief moment, a flicker of awareness, perhaps a surprised grunt, a sudden wide-eyed glance of terror, but it's over before it truly begins. With a sudden, swift, almost effortless movement, born of weeks of pent-up tension and a perverse sense of finality, Arthur pushes him into the dark, swirling, indifferent waters of the Thames he goes. There's a splash, a brief, desperate flailing, a gurgle that quickly fades, choked and swallowed by the vast, ancient indifference of the river and the oppressive, isolating silence of the fog. No witnesses, no lingering evidence, just the vast, indifferent expanse of the night and the river, carrying its secret out to sea. It's efficient. Horrifyingly so. And utterly final. And then, in the immediate aftermath, something truly remarkable, and deeply unsettling, happens within Lord Arthur. The crushing weight that had burdened him for weeks, months even, a weight that had manifested as a perpetual knot in his stomach, a dull ache behind his eyes, a constant shadow in his peripheral vision, instantaneously lifts. Imagine that profound, visceral release. The profound sense of a task completed. Not just any task, but the task. The one that was fated, the one he had to do, the one that stood as an insurmountable barrier between him and his longed-for happiness. The relief, according to Wilde, is not just immense, it's transformative. It's a profound, almost spiritual cleansing. He stands there, on the embankment, watching the ripples subside, the surface of the river return to its placid, dark state, and feels free. Not guilt-ridden, not horrified, not even remotely disturbed, but utterly, completely free. The dark cloud that had hovered over him, threatening to engulf him in perpetual gloom, dissipates, replaced by a clarity, a lightness of being he hasn't experienced since that dreadful evening at Lady Windermere's, before the cheiromantist's fateful pronouncement. It's the completed duty. The destiny fulfilled. He hasn't committed a murder out of malice or greed or passion. In his own convoluted, aristocratic mind, he's done it out of a perverse sense of honor, a misguided commitment to a prophecy, and the fundamental desire to safeguard his future happiness with Sybil, to purify their union. In his mind, he hasn't done something evil, he's merely righted a cosmic wrong, cleared a path dictated by the stars, obeyed a higher, more abstract law than the petty laws of man. And that, perhaps, is the most chilling aspect of all. Not the act itself, which is brutal but quick, but Arthur's reaction to it. His immediate, almost instantaneous sense of peace, his almost triumphant feeling of having successfully navigated the treacherous waters of fate, of having outmaneuvered a malevolent destiny. He feels a perfect sense of calm, an almost blissful tranquility, as if a fever has broken. The world, which had been murky and threatening, full of shadowed corners and lurking anxieties, suddenly snaps into focus, bright and promising. He can marry Sybil now. The path is clear. He has paid his dues to destiny. He walks away from the embankment, not as a panicked, conscience-stricken killer, but as a man who has finally, after much struggle and many false starts, finished a difficult but absolutely necessary chore. The oppressive weight of the world, of an unavoidable fate, is finally off his shoulders. He is, for the first time, Chapter 11, The Happy Ending. Alright, my friends, welcome back. We've reached a pivotal moment in our journey through Oscar Wilde's darkly delightful tale, Lord Arthur Savile's Crime. If you've been following along, you'll remember we left our impeccably dressed, somewhat bewildered protagonist, Lord Arthur, standing on the embankment, the Thames flowing silently by, as the reverberations of an explosion settled into the chilly London air. He had just, quite inadvertently, or perhaps, with a twisted sort of predestination, ensured the demise of Herr Winkelkopf, the anarchist bomb maker. A death he believed was his ordained fate to commit. But now, what truly happens after such an unconventional act? How does the world react? And more importantly, how does Lord Arthur Savile, the conscientious murderer, navigate the aftermath? London, with its insatiable appetite for drama and its curiously selective memory, often has a way of digesting even the most bizarre occurrences into palatable headlines. And so it was with the demise of Herr Winkelkopf. Wilde, ever the astute observer of society's mechanisms, presents us with the perfect media response, a response that absolves Arthur of any direct culpability in the public eye. The newspapers, those ubiquitous arbiters of truth and gossip, soon filled their columns with the sordid details. Not of a murder, mind you, but of an unfortunate accident. A tragic mishap involving an anarchist, his dangerous experiments, and a rather volatile device. There were murmurs, perhaps, of carelessness, of radical folly, but never, not once, was the name of Lord Arthur Savile implicated. The official narrative solidified, Herr Winkelkopf had been the sole architect of his own explosive end. For Arthur, this was nothing short of a miracle. Can you imagine the profound relief? He had spent weeks, no, months, agonizing over his destiny, trying to find the right person, the right method, to commit his prophesied crime. He had fumbled, he had failed, he had almost poisoned an aunt and blasted an uncle. Yet, through a sheer stroke of cosmic irony, or perhaps, Wilde's cynical genius, the deed was done, and society, in its blissful ignorance, had neatly tidied it away, categorizing it as an unfortunate, self-inflicted incident. This, my friends, is where Wilde truly shines a light on the performative nature of Victorian society. Appearance is everything. It wasn't just about committing the act, but about how it was perceived. Arthur's primary concern wasn't so much the moral weight of murder, but the propriety of it, the correctness of fulfilling his fate without causing undue scandal. And now, he had achieved it. The world, oblivious to his internal struggles and his dark mission, simply saw a tragic accident. The slate, in the eyes of society, was clean. What a relief for a man so obsessed with decorum. Think about the dark humor inherent in this. Arthur, a man who had dedicated himself to meticulously planning a murder out of a warped sense of duty, is completely unburdened by the actual act. He doesn't grapple with guilt or remorse in the traditional sense. His relief stems from the successful completion of his task, and even more so, from the public's exoneration. It's a brilliant, albeit chilling, indictment of a society where the appearance of rectitude often overshadows genuine moral introspection. The victim, poor Herr Winkelkopf, is merely a footnote, a casualty deemed suitable for Arthur's bizarre quest, and then conveniently forgotten by the wider world. His life, and death, served merely as a means to an end for Arthur's perceived cosmic duty. With the deed done, and society none the wiser, or rather, wisely ignorant, Lord Arthur Savile could finally claim his peace, and more importantly, his promised happiness. For him, the obstacle had been removed. The dark shadow of the prophecy had been lifted. And what does a good Victorian gentleman do once his existential crisis is resolved? He gets married, of course. The narrative swiftly moves us towards the long-awaited union of Lord Arthur and his beloved. She sees a man who has overcome some unspecified difficulty, a man now ready to embrace life with joy. The irony, of course, is that the difficulty was actively pursuing murder, and the resolution was, well, achieving it. It's a marriage built on a foundation of blissful ignorance and a cleverly disguised crime. Wilde doesn't let us forget the unsettling undercurrent beneath this picture-perfect surface. And here, my friends, we arrive at the very heart of Wilde's satirical genius and perhaps the most unsettling aspect of the entire story, Lord Arthur's complete and utter lack of guilt. This isn't a man racked by nightmares, haunted by his victim's ghost, or wrestling with existential dread after taking a life. On the contrary, Arthur is content. He is relieved. He feels, if anything, a sense of profound satisfaction. Why? Because, in his twisted aristocratic logic, he fulfilled his duty. The prophecy had decreed he would commit murder, and by ensuring Winkelkopf's demise, he had simply acted as an agent of fate. He wasn't a criminal, he was a conscientious executor of a predetermined event. He had tried his best to be proper about it, to ensure it was the right murder, for the right reasons, i.e., to free himself to marry Sybil without the shadow of a future crime hanging over them. This is where the conscientious murderer truly comes into play. Arthur didn't commit murder out of malice, greed, or passion. He committed it out of a misguided sense of obligation, an absurd adherence to a superstitious belief. His moral compass isn't broken, it's simply calibrated to an entirely different, highly illogical set of principles. He believes he acted honorably, having completed a necessary, if unpleasant, task. The fact that the task involved ending a human life seems almost secondary to the completion of the task itself. Wilde is brilliantly satirizing the superficiality of Victorian morality, the absurdity of taking appearances over substance. Arthur is a product of his environment, a world where breeding, decorum, and reputation are paramount. His attempts to commit murder are almost comically earnest, almost bureaucratic. He consults experts, he buys poisons, he acquires bombs. He approaches it like a chore, an unpleasant duty that simply must be done before he can get on with the more pleasant aspects of life, like marriage. This detachment from genuine moral consequences is chilling. Arthur is not a psychopath, he's simply a man so absorbed in his own aristocratic bubble, so convinced by the pronouncements of a charlatan cheiromantist, that he loses all perspective on the sanctity of human life. He embodies the worst excesses of a certain kind of privileged entitlement, where personal comfort and convenience trump everything else. The irony is that his conscientiousness in preparing for the murder is what makes him so utterly amoral in carrying it out. He isn't evil, he's simply absurdly, dangerously naive, and utterly self-absorbed. My personal take on this is that Wilde isn't just making us laugh, he's making us squirm. He's holding a mirror up to the moral compromises we often make, the justifications we invent for our less than noble actions, and the way we can externalize responsibility. Arthur represents that part of us that might intellectualize or rationalize away uncomfortable truths, especially when our own happiness is at stake. It's a dark comedy of manners, but with a profoundly unsettling core message about the fragility of our ethical frameworks when faced with deeply ingrained superstitions or personal desires. The story's happy ending for Arthur is precisely its most disturbing feature. He sails into marital bliss, an accidental murderer, completely unburdened by his actions. Society has granted him absolution through ignorance, and he has granted himself absolution through a bizarre, self-serving interpretation of fate. The satire here is pointed and timeless. How easily can we convince ourselves of the rightness of our actions, even when those actions are fundamentally wrong? Simple. Chapter 12, Epilogue, A Model Life. Alright, let's dive into the final, deliciously wicked twist of Lord Arthur Savile's story. Settle in, grab a cup of tea, or something stronger, because this is where Oscar Wilde truly shines, delivering that signature blend of wit and profound irony. Hello again, fascinating people. We've been on quite a journey with Lord Arthur Savile, haven't we? From the polite anxieties of a perfectly proper English gentleman to the, well, the rather unorthodox methods he employed to ensure his future happiness. Now, as our story draws to a close, we arrive at what Wilde, with his characteristic genius, calls epilogue a model life. And believe me, it's an epilogue that's anything but a gentle fade out. It's a final, ironic crescendo, a last, lingering laugh that leaves you pondering the very nature of morality and domestic bliss. So, what becomes of our diligent, if slightly unhinged, protagonist? Years have passed since the fateful night at the Embankment. The dark cloud that once hung over Lord Arthur Savile's meticulously ordered life has, seemingly, vanished. We flash forward to a scene that could be lifted straight from a Victorian idyll, a grand country estate, bathed in the soft glow of an English afternoon. Lady Sybil, now Lady Savile, blossoms beautifully by his side, her gentle spirit matched by his newfound serenity. Their home is a haven of quiet elegance, filled with the laughter of several healthy, charming children, whose presence seems to anchor Arthur to the world in a way he never was before. Arthur himself is utterly transformed. The nervous, fidgety young man, burdened by an abstract sense of impending doom, is gone. In his place stands a pillar of calm, a model husband, father, and citizen. He's admired in society, beloved by his family, and, most importantly, content within himself. His days are filled with the pleasant rhythms of country life, civic duties, and the unwavering devotion of his wife. He looks out upon his perfect world, and one might think, ah, finally, true happiness. But, of course, with Wilde, nothing is ever that simple. This domestic bliss, this picture of an ideal life, is built upon a foundation that most of us would find deeply disturbing. Now, for the final, exquisite moment of dramatic irony, Wilde brings back a familiar face, one who, inadvertently, set this whole macabre plot in motion. At one of Lady Savile's effortlessly elegant garden parties, amidst the tinkling of teacups and the rustle of silk, who should glide into view but the ever-charming, ever-gossiping Lady Windermere? You remember her, don't you? The one who first introduced the dreaded cheiromantist, Mr. Podgers, to Arthur. As Lady Windermere, radiating her usual blend of social grace and delightful superficiality, engages Arthur in conversation, the subject of palmistry inevitably comes up. It's a conversation that, for Arthur, must be a masterclass in polite dissimulation. And, dear Arthur, Lady Windermere might say, fanning herself delicately, do you still believe in that amusing science of chiromancy? I confess, after that delightful Mr. Podgers told me my lifeline was quite exceptional, I became quite a convert. Though I do find it rather unsettling when he pointed out poor Mrs. Vandelor's unfortunate propensity for, well, you know, not living very long. Arthur, ever the polite host, would merely smile a knowing, almost complacent smile. Lady Windermere, he'd likely respond, his voice calm and steady, utterly devoid of the tremor of fear that once plagued him, I assure you, I find such things utterly charming in theory, but quite without merit in practice. A delightful parlor game, perhaps, but hardly a reliable guide to life's true currents. Lady Windermere, of course, would take this as urbane dismissal, not as a man speaking from the deepest, darkest corners of experience. She'd probably just flutter her eyelashes and insist, oh, but he was so wonderfully accurate about your lovely long life, dear boy. I distinctly recall him saying you were destined for great longevity and a most contente. Wilde leaves us not with a clear moral judgment, but with a lingering question: in a world obsessed with appearances, can a dark truth ever truly spoil a perfectly crafted veneer of happiness? And what does that say about us? Hello again, fascinating people. We've been on quite a journey with Lord Arthur Savile, haven't we? From the polite anxieties of a perfectly proper English gentleman to the rather unorthodox methods he employed to ensure his future happiness. Now, as our story draws to a close, we arrive at what Wilde, with his characteristic genius, calls epilogue, a model life. And believe me, it's an epilogue that's anything but a gentle fade out. It's a final, ironic crescendo, a last, lingering laugh that leaves you pondering the very nature of morality and domestic bliss. So, what becomes of our diligent, if slightly unhinged, protagonist? Years have passed since the fateful night at the Embankment. The dark cloud that once hung over Lord Arthur Savile's meticulously ordered life has, seemingly, vanished. We flash forward to a scene that could be lifted straight from a Victorian idyll, a grand country estate, bathed in the soft glow of an English afternoon. Lady Sybil, now Lady Savile, blossoms beautifully by his side, her gentle spirit matched by his newfound serenity. Their home is a haven of quiet elegance, filled with the laughter of several healthy, charming children, whose presence seems to anchor Arthur to the world in a way he never was before. Arthur himself is utterly transformed. The nervous, fidgety young man, burdened by an abstract sense of impending doom, is gone. In his place stands a pillar of calm, a model husband, father, and citizen. He's admired in society, beloved by his family, and, most importantly, content within himself. His days are filled with the pleasant rhythms of country life, civic duties, and the unwavering devotion of his wife. He looks out upon his perfect world, and one might think, ah, finally, true happiness. But, of course, with Wilde, nothing is ever that simple. This domestic bliss, this picture of an ideal life, is built upon a foundation that most of us would find deeply disturbing. Now, for the final, exquisite moment of dramatic irony, Wilde brings back a familiar face, one who, inadvertently, set this whole macabre plot in motion. At one of Lady Savile's effortlessly elegant garden parties, amidst the tinkling of teacups and the rustle of silk, who should glide into view but the ever-charming, ever-gossiping Lady Windermere? You remember her, don't you? The one who first introduced the dreaded cheiromantist, Mr. Podgers, to Arthur. As Lady Windermere, radiating her usual blend of social grace and delightful superficiality, engages Arthur in conversation, the subject of palmistry inevitably comes up. It's a conversation that, for Arthur, must be a masterclass in polite dissimulation. And, dear Arthur, Lady Windermere might say, fanning herself delicately, do you still believe in that amusing science of chiromancy? I confess, after that delightful Mr. Podgers told me my lifeline was quite exceptional, I became quite a convert. Though I do find it rather unsettling when he pointed out poor Mrs. Vandelor's unfortunate propensity for, well, you know, not living very long. Arthur, ever the polite host, would merely smile a knowing, almost complacent smile. Lady Windermere, he'd likely respond, his voice calm and steady, utterly devoid of the tremor of fear that once plagued him. I assure you, I find such things utterly charming in theory, but quite without merit in practice. A delightful parlor game, perhaps, but hardly a reliable guide to life's true currents. Lady Windermere, of course, would take this as urbane dismissal, not as a man speaking from the deepest, darkest corners of experience. She'd probably just flutter her eyelashes and insist, "Oh, but he was so wonderfully accurate about your lovely long life, dear boy. I distinctly recall him saying you were destined for great longevity and a most contented existence. And just look. The 7-day action plan, mastering your fate. All right, my friends, gather round. We've just navigated the fascinating labyrinth of Lord Arthur Savile's mind, a man so utterly convinced of a prophesied murder that he embarks on a bizarre, almost bureaucratic quest to fulfill it. It's Oscar Wilde at his most delightfully cynical, reminding us that even the most well-meaning intentions can go wildly, hilariously astray. A preposterous premise, absolutely. But beneath the shimmering surface of Wildean wit and aristocratic absurdity, there's a surprisingly potent, albeit twisted, lesson about agency. About fate. About taking your life into your own hands, hopefully without the homicidal tendencies, obviously. And let's be very clear on that last part. No murders required for this plan. Because let's be honest with ourselves for a moment. We all have our own little prophecies, don't we? Our own perceived destinies, our own self-imposed limitations, or even external pressures that feel as binding and as inescapable as a palm reading from a mysterious cheiromantist. What if, just what if, we could actually craft our own destiny, on our own terms? What if we could systematically dismantle the invisible shackles that keep us from truly mastering our fate? What if we could be the authors, rather than just the characters, in our own life stories? Well, inspired by the sheer, unbridled audacity of Lord Arthur, who, for all his moral failings, did take incredibly decisive action, I've concocted a little something special for you. A satirical, yet surprisingly practical, 7-day action plan, mastering your fate. No, you won't be plotting any crimes, I promise. But you will be taking a hard, honest look at the superstitions and duties that might be holding you back, and then taking a decisive step towards genuine freedom. Ready to rewrite some scripts? Let's dive in. Day 1 to 2, identify your superstitions, what false narratives hold you back. Now, Lord Arthur's entire predicament springs from a single, utterly compelling superstition, the belief in palmistry. He genuinely believes that what a charlatan told him about his future is an immutable, unchangeable truth, a pre-written script he must follow. And it leads him down a very dark, very specific, and quite frankly, absurd path. For us, in the 21st century, our superstitions aren't usually about palmistry or crystal balls. They're far more insidious, often cloaked in the guise of common sense, inherited wisdom, or even aspects of our personal identity we've never questioned. They're those deeply ingrained beliefs about ourselves, about the world, or about what's truly possible for us, that, when you really look at them, just aren't actually true. We're talking false narratives. Limiting beliefs. self-fulfilling prophecies, even. And they hold us back just as surely, just as powerfully, as Arthur's fated murder held him captive. Perhaps even more so, because we don't even recognize them for what they are. Think about it for a moment. Have you ever caught yourself uttering, or even just thinking, things like, "Oh, I'm just not a morning person, never have been, never will be, I could never, ever start my own business, I'm far too risk-averse, it's just not in my nature, I'm simply not creative enough to do something like that"? Only those kinds of people, the lucky ones, the talented ones, the ones with connections, get to do that. I'm too old/young/tired/busy/unqualified to learn something new or switch careers. I always mess things up when it matters most. These, my friends, are not immutable facts. They are narratives. They're stories we tell ourselves, often unconsciously, often inherited from childhood or past experiences, that subtly dictate our behavior and limit our potential. They're the echoes of past failures magnified, the whispers of societal expectations internalized, or even just convenient excuses we've adopted to avoid stepping outside our comfort zones. And they are, I submit to you, utterly debilitating. They keep us tethered when we could be soaring. For these first two, he's not just fulfilling a prophecy, he's fulfilling a duty to his class, to his family, to the idea of himself as a respectable gentleman, even as he plots homicide. This brings us to a crucial question for our journey: how many things in your life are you doing purely out of a sense of duty, not to your own authentic desires, but to an external expectation? Are you living a script handed to you by your parents, your peers, your culture, or even a past version of yourself that no longer resonates? This duty audit is a deep dive into your commitments. I want you to look at every major area of your life, your career, your relationships, your hobbies, your daily routines, your financial decisions. And for each one, ask yourself, am I doing this because it genuinely serves my values, my joy, my growth, or am I doing this because I should? Because it's what's expected of me? Because it's the right thing to do in someone else's eyes? Would I continue this if nobody was watching? If there were no external rewards or punishments? This can be uncomfortable. It means peeling back layers of ingrained behavior. Maybe you're in a career path that was your parents' dream, not yours. Maybe you maintain friendships out of obligation rather than genuine connection. Maybe your weekends are filled with activities you dread, but feel you must attend. I remember a period in my life where I was doing so many shoulds. I should go to this networking event. I should volunteer for that committee. I should keep up with these acquaintances. And I was utterly exhausted, feeling like I was constantly performing for an invisible audience. It wasn't until I started to distinguish between duties born of genuine love and purpose, and duties born of fear or external validation, that I started to reclaim my energy and my time. For these 3 days, scrutinize your calendar, your to-do list, and your mental obligations. Highlight everything that feels like a duty imposed from the outside, rather than a choice born from within. Again, no judgment, just observation. We're identifying the cargo before we decide what to jettison. Lord Arthur felt duty-bound to commit murder. Our duties might be less dramatic, but equally restrictive if they're not aligned with who we truly are. Day 6 to 7, Radical Action. Take one decisive step to clear your path, sans murder. Alright. You've identified your superstitions, those false narratives holding you back. You've audited your duties, separating genuine purpose from external obligation. Now comes the moment of truth. The action. Lord Arthur, for all his bizarre moral compass, was a man of action. Once he identified his duty, to murder someone before marriage, he didn't just brood about it. He acted. He tried a series of elaborate, increasingly desperate schemes to fulfill his perceived destiny. And eventually, he succeeded. Now, let me be abundantly clear, our radical action involves zero homicidal intent. We are not following Lord Arthur's exact methodology here. But we are borrowing his spirit of decisive, unapologetic action to clear our path. For these final 2 days, I want you to look at your lists from the previous days. Look at those stubborn superstitions, those draining duties. Pick one. Just one. The one that feels most urgent, most stifling, most ready to be confronted. And then, take one decisive step to address it. This isn't about solving everything in 48 hours. It's about breaking the inertia. It's about sending a clear signal to yourself, and the universe, that you are taking agency. What might this look like? Superstition. If your superstition is "I'm not creative enough," your radical action might be to sign up for a beginner's art class, or write a short story, or even just dedicate an hour to doodling, without judgment. It's a direct challenge to the narrative. Duty. If your duty audit revealed you're spending too much time on an obligatory social engagement, your radical action might be to politely decline the next invitation, or to set a firm time limit for your Summary. 3 key takeaways. Alright, so we've journeyed through the darkly whimsical corridors of Oscar Wilde's Lord Arthur Savile's Crime. We've watched a man, seemingly a paragon of Victorian virtue, grapple with a most peculiar destiny, and we've probably chuckled a few times, perhaps a little nervously. Now, before we send Lord Arthur off to his rather unconventional happily ever after, let's distill this potent little novella, this glittering gem of social satire, into 3 key takeaways. These are the threads that, for me, truly weave the tapestry of Wilde's genius in this particular story. So, grab a cup of tea, or perhaps something a little stronger if you're feeling Wildean, and let's dive in. Takeaway number 1, the absurdity of social conventions superseding morality. This, for me, is the beating heart of Lord Arthur Savile's Crime, and it's a theme Wilde returns to again and again in his work. What do I mean by it here? Well, consider Lord Arthur himself. He's a charming, handsome, wealthy young man, engaged to be married to the equally charming and wealthy Sybil Merton. By all accounts, he's the picture of Victorian propriety. Then, a palm reader M.R. Podgers tells him he's destined to commit a murder. Now, a normal person, upon hearing such a prophecy, might dismiss it, or perhaps introspect, or even seek help. But Lord Arthur? Oh no. His primary concern isn't the moral abhorrence of murder itself. It's the timing. He can't possibly marry Sybil with this dreadful deed hanging over his head. It would be unseemly. It would be a stain on their perfect union, a most inconvenient social faux pas. Think about that for a moment. His concern is not, "Oh my God, I'm going to take a human life, how can I prevent this?" It's, "I must get this murder out of the way before the wedding so it doesn't inconvenience anyone, especially my fiancé, and certainly not society." He literally views murder as a chore, a regrettable but necessary item on his prenuptial to-do list, right after picking out the china pattern and before confirming the guest list. Wilde, with his rapier wit, is holding up a mirror to the superficiality of Victorian society, where appearances, reputation, and the strict adherence to unwritten social rules often held far more sway than genuine ethical considerations. The goodness of an individual was often measured by their conformity to class expectations, not by the purity of their actions or intentions. Lord Arthur isn't a villain, he's a product of his environment, so deeply entrenched in these absurd conventions that he genuinely believes he's acting honorably by getting it over with. He's performing his duty, as he perceives it, to his future wife and to society. The sheer, audacious nerve of Wilde to present this with a straight face, or rather, with Lord Arthur's perfectly earnest face, is what makes it so brilliant and so utterly damning. It forces us to ask, how often do we, even today, prioritize what looks good over what is good? How much of our own morality is just performative, designed to fit into a particular social construct? Takeaway number 2, the danger of self-fulfilling prophecies. This novella serves as a fantastic, darkly comedic cautionary tale about the immense power of belief, particularly when that belief comes from an external source and takes root in an impressionable mind. Lord Arthur is told he will commit a murder. Initially, he's horrified. But then, as we just discussed, his Victorian sense of duty kicks in, and he accepts it as an inevitable, albeit inconvenient, truth. The crucial point is this, the prophecy itself becomes the catalyst for the act. Before meeting Mr. Podgers, there's absolutely no indication that Lord Arthur has a violent bone in his body. He's described as mild-mannered, sweet-natured, perhaps a bit simple. But once the seed of the prophecy is planted, it transforms him. He doesn't want to commit murder, but he feels compelled to. His subsequent, hilariously inept attempts at poisoning various elderly relatives are not born of malice, but of a misguided sense of CTA. Join the discussion. Alright, my dear listeners, my fellow travelers through the labyrinthine corridors of human nature and literary genius. We've just spent some fascinating, if slightly unsettling, time in the peculiar company of Lord Arthur Savile. We've witnessed his rather unique approach to what he perceived as his destiny, haven't we? His unwavering belief in that cheiromantist prophecy, and his subsequent, chillingly logical, and utterly absurd mission to fulfill it before his wedding day. It's a narrative that, in classic Wildean fashion, manages to be both darkly humorous and deeply thought-provoking, leaving us with more than a few lingering questions and a profound sense of the ironic absurdities of life. And this, I think, brings us to the very heart of the matter, the kind of profound question that Oscar Wilde, with all his wit and piercing insight, loved to dangle before us like a perfectly polished moral paradox. It's the kind of question that echoes long after the last page is turned, long after the final word has been spoken, compelling us to look inward and ponder the very fabric of our existence and the forces that guide it. So, let me ask you, directly, right here and now, as we wrap up our journey with Lord Arthur, do you believe in fate, or do we truly make our own luck? Think about Lord Arthur Savile, for a moment. In his own mind, he was utterly convinced he was destined to commit murder. He didn't question the prophecy's validity, indeed, he accepted it with a kind of aristocratic resignation, an almost detached sense of duty. He only questioned its timing and methodology, feeling compelled, not by an external force exactly, but by an internal, self-imposed obligation to align himself with what he believed was written in the stars, or, in this case, in the cryptic lines of his palm. He actively chose to carry out the murder, believing it to be a preordained necessity, thereby paradoxically exercising his free will to fulfill what he thought was his fate. It's a deliciously convoluted piece of psychological reasoning, isn't it? A perfect Wildean twist on the age-old debate between determinism and free will, blurring the lines between what is inevitable and what is chosen. This isn't just about a fictional character from the Victorian era. It's a question that has haunted philosophers for millennia, from the ancient Greeks debating the will of the gods to modern neuroscience exploring the very illusion of choice. Have you ever felt that way? Have you ever had a moment, a gut feeling, a strange coincidence, or even a casual remark from a fortune teller or a particularly vivid dream, that made you wonder if your path was already laid out? Perhaps it was a good omen, suggesting a promotion was on the horizon, or a bad one, warning you to avoid a certain decision or encounter. How did you react to it? Did you lean into it, passively awaiting its unfolding, perhaps seeing it as an exciting, pre-written adventure that simply needed to play out? Or did you actively, almost aggressively, try to either make it happen or prevent it, thereby perhaps unknowingly becoming the very agent of its realization? We often hear stories of people who, believing they are destined for greatness, work tirelessly to achieve it, and in doing so, create the very destiny they believed in. Or conversely, those who, convinced of impending doom, withdraw and ironically invite misfortune into their lives through their self-fulfilling prophecies. This isn't just about palmistry, of course. It's about the broader human experience of navigating uncertainty, of striving for purpose, and of grappling with the profound implications of our choices. It's about the comfort, and sometimes the terror, of believing that some things are simply meant to be. If we believe entirely in fate, does it absolve us of responsibility? Does it give us an excuse for inaction, or for questionable choices? It was meant to happen, we might say, shrugging off accountability, perhaps too easily. But what if our belief in fate is itself a powerful, self-fulfilling prophecy? Thank you for listening to this audiobook. If you found value, meaning, or inspiration in this journey, please remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you won't miss the next chapter. Your support helps us bring more timeless classics to life. See you in the next reading.